Good evening and welcome to Showtime Toastmasters monthly Power Hour workshop. Tonight's Power Hour is 50 plus ways to turn off your audience. Our presenter tonight is distinguished Toastmaster Bobby O'Connell. She is a retired business analyst who has been studying the business of public speaking for over 2 decades. She has been a Toastmaster since 1993 and has served as District 3 Speakers Bureau Chair, Spring Conference Chair, and in many other leadership roles. Bobby has also spoken before dozens of non-Toastmasters audiences, doing workshops, training sessions, conferences, and other presentations for community groups. In tonight's workshop, Bobby will lead a discussion about words, actions, and other behaviors that can irritate and distract our audience. It is her goal that you will leave this session with specific strategies to become a more engaging speaker who can connect with your audience and keep their attention. Please join me in welcoming distinguished Toastmaster Bobby O'Connell as she presents 50 ways to turn off your audience.
Thank you, Marilyn. Good evening, everyone. I am so happy that you took the time and made the decision to join us tonight. And some of you may recall that I subscribe to a weekly newsletter that's geared toward professional speakers. It's called SpeakerNet News, and every edition includes tips for speakers. And I've been collecting these tips for many years now. And every newsletter also includes a topic of the month. And this is where they ask people to respond with their thoughts on a particular topic. So recently, the topic of the month was audience turnoffs. And as I was adding these turnoffs to my list of speaking tips, it occurred to me that this might be a fun topic for a Power Hour session. So here we are. The basis of tonight's workshop is actually that list of tips from professional speakers, as well as some additional information that I gathered in my own research. But here's the thing, we are all experts on this topic because each of us has opinions about speakers and what they do that turns us off as a member of the audience. So tonight I'm looking to you as experts, and I invite you to share your thoughts and your experiences throughout the session tonight. So again, just use the raise hand button or put something in the chat and we'll be sure and call on you. And then a reminder to unmute when you're called on. I also want to let you know that you do not need to take notes tonight. I have prepared a 5-page handout that lists actually over 100 ways to turn off your audience. And I'll post that into the chat at the end of the session. And the reason I'm doing this is because I don't want you to have to worry about scribbling down your notes or reading over a document during the session. I'd much prefer that you just participate and listen and think about what it is that bugs you from speakers. And as we're talking tonight, I think we may come up with a few additional things. So what I'll also do is the things that we think of in addition, I'll add them to the list and then I'll send out a revised list to you in the next few days. So again, don't worry about notes, just participate. And if you feel at all panicked, just remember you can always watch the replay on the YouTube channel. And to put some structure into our discussion, I've categorized these things that turn an audience off into 3 broad categories. And the first category is what I'm calling language and verbal tips, or tics. These are things that the odd counter or the grammarian would look for, like pause fillers and grammar and pronunciation, transitions, phrasing and word choices, or vocal tonality, for example. And the second major category is physical turnoffs. Of course, that includes things like gestures and body language. I'm throwing in PowerPoint and other technology issues into the physical turnoffs category as well. And then the last category for our discussion tonight is what I'm broadly calling speaker behaviors and attitudes. And by that, I'm thinking of just things in general, behaviors and attitudes in general, but also some specific subcategories like time management and handling of activities and Q&A, your content choices. And these days, a really big topic is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's something we'll spend a little time on towards the end. Now, for this first category, we're going to focus the discussion on language and verbal tics. So what is it that bugs you? You know, what do speakers do that turn us off? What does the odd counter and grammarian look for? Who's ready? Who's ready to raise their hand and contribute? Okay, Marilyn.
It's sad that I have one that just leaps to mind like this, but it's when people do, when they're speaking and they kind of end their sentence with a, and you can hear it and it drives me crazy. There's one.
Thank you. Who else? Kathy, I see your hand is up.
Thank you. Yes, when you mentioned it, the ums and ahs that they maybe subconsciously or don't consciously realize that they're entering into the speech. I know at work, since I've been in Toastmasters at work, I am so lucky that I don't have a clicker at work during our company meetings, because I probably still wouldn't be there. My CEO, everybody is really likes ums and ahs, and my big bugaboo, you know. No, I don't know. That's why I am sitting here. So those are things that are common, but I think still the most irritating habits people have.
I totally get that. And I watched the news and noticed the same thing. Connie, I saw your hand up.
This might seem really petty, but there's just some voices automatically that turn me off. And they could be very educated and knowledgeable, but it's their tone or something about the pitch, their voice is just like, mm-mm.
I actually have that on the list, Connie, and I included a whiny sound or a nasally sound or a high-pitched shrill sound. That is like fingers on a chalkboard to me.
Yeah.
Cynthia, you've been very patient with your hand up.
Thank you. I have one that's also that was mentioned earlier, like, you know, like. And someone was doing it over the weekend, so I just started liking them back, and they realized how often they were saying is number one. Number two, flipping of the hair. Just flipping the hair irks me to no end, which is why I do not watch Martha Stewart, because no matter what she cooked, she was always touching her hair. So it's those repeated hair gestures and like.
Okay, so that's one for the language category and one for the physical category. The likes and then the hair touching is more of a physical thing. So Lori Carr, you've got your hand up. If you'll unmute, Lori.
Okay. One thing that really bugs me is the grammar. When somebody says, him and me went to the store and they consistently say, I seen this, and then they say, well, I should have saw that. And I'm thinking, where were you in English class, folks? So that really drives me crazy.
Thank you, Lori. Who else? Laura Lee, did you have something to add? Oh, Nikki, I see your hand is up.
When they talk really slow and measured in a monotone, almost like they're almost dead. It's like they're asleep. They're putting me to sleep.
You're right. And another one that has to do with voice and tonality is, have you ever heard a speaker that is making a declarative sentence and then they end their sentence as if it's a question? Laura Lee, your hand is up.
I think in contests when, not contests, but in a meeting when the club has agreed that if they go over time, they're going to clap them down, and they're clapping and they don't get it, that they need to stop, and they keep trying to talk over the clapping and everyone's clapping louder. And it's just a little frustrating because we all agreed before the meeting started what the rules were.
Yeah, I totally get that too. And so here's another category for you to think about, and that is words and pronunciations. So for example, words, have you heard people say ax instead of ask, or escape or especially instead of escape or especially? And I had an old boss who always talked about the physical year instead of the fiscal year. And I've heard speakers do that as well. And I just cringe when I hear that. Or how about using the wrong words like moot versus mute, or affect versus effect. And there's a whole, you can go online and Google a whole list of words like that. Any other thoughts, Connie?
I love your first example because when my husband, who's from back east, and I first got together, one of his was ask, and he would say axed. And I said, sweetie, you can only ax one person once. And he hates that when I say that. And every once in a while, when we're back east, he'll come out, he'll get that East Coast mentality, attitude, and then he'll start talking like that. And I have to remind him that you can only ax one person once, but that's a pet peeve.
Yeah, excellent example. So here's one that is an issue, I think, for TLI presenters. And Warren, you've got your hand up. I'll let you go first.
Well, where people will take two words and turn them into a contraction that doesn't exist. Instead of saying, I'm going to, they'll say, I'm enough.
Oh, yeah, that's a good example. And where I was thinking on the TLI presenters is, if you're a brand new Toastmaster sitting in officer training and you start hearing people talk about TLI and DDs and ADs and, you know, PQD and all those acronyms that we have, if acronyms are unexplained, that's a problem for an audience. And especially in Toastmasters, brand new Toastmasters are probably, you know, zooming in their head. What the heck are they talking about? So any other examples that someone would like to share? Kathy, I see your hand. And you're on mute.
There I go. Not being able to use the mute button properly, but that's a whole nother story. If you're doing a speech about a person or wanting to talk about somebody in particular, when they mispronounce their names, if you're going to give a speech with someone's name is in the speech, or a famous person or whomever it might be, practice that name beforehand, because it's very embarrassing excuse me, to have that happen during the speech.
Yes. You know, and on the list that I picked up from that newsletter, the examples from professional speakers, one person said they don't like the phrase "as I mentioned," because they said you don't need to tell people that you're repeating information, just do it. And another example of a phrase that they didn't like was, should I repeat the question? If you have to ask if you should repeat the question, you probably should be repeating the question. Just do it. And Robin, I see your hand is up.
Yes. One of the things that I think a lot of people are doing, and I know I do it myself because I just did, is run-on sentences where you say, I went to the store and then I was looking for bread and then I found it in the back of the store, but they were out of what I wanted, blah, 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 blah. How do I keep up with all of that?
Great example, Robin. Thank you. Kathy, your hand is up again.
Yes, when Robin was speaking, it just reminded me, and I have this terrible habit of not staying on topic. When you get somebody who's giving a speech about a particular topic, and they'll all of a sudden go on off into left field about something else, and stay focused on what you want to say. I know that I was talking to someone in our club actually mentioned that to me in a review they gave on one of my speeches, and I mentioned that to my sister, and she looked at me like, well, yeah, you do get off topic a lot. And so I didn't realize that until she looked at me like, of course. So I'm trying to I'll try to shut up now, but that's one of them that really bugs me.
Okay. And Marilyn, I see your hand.
It's going to be real quick. This is playing off of something Kathy said. I actually was watching a town hall recently, and the principal person on the town hall could not remember the names of the people he had just gotten a question from, who had just identified themselves. Totally called them by the wrong name. Don't do that. Okay.
Wow, that's one I hadn't thought of. So how about another professional speaker doesn't like the phrase about taking a bathroom break. She thinks you should just say, take a break, because adults know what they want to do on their own breaks. Now, a more recent version of that is what I've heard called a bio break. So just to get your opinions, if you think the term bio break is questionable, could be a turnoff, raise your hand if you think if bio break could be a turnoff. So maybe, I'm taking that as a maybe. Okay. So something to think about. And then what about people who have accents that speak too fast? It's a challenge to understand that person. And then recently I attend a lot of online genealogy webinars. And just recently there was one session where the woman was coughing incessantly throughout the session. And I just wanted to reach through the camera and give her a cough drop and a bottle of water. So I guess we need to make sure and take care of our voices, and so that we're ready to present. Now, do we have any more, or shall we move on? Connie, I see, is that a hand? Okay. So I'm sure we could come up with many, many more examples. And in fact, on the handout that I'll share with you, number 1 through number 34 all have to do with language and verbal tics. And just so you know, I did post in a chat the 3 categories and some sort of subcategories within each category in the chat. So let's talk now about physical turnoffs. And these, by the way, are number 35 through number 59 on the handout. So for example, don't smile, don't use gestures, don't make eye contact, pace back and forth on the stage, or hide behind the lectern. And we had this really awesome speaker in my very first Toastmasters club, which was Noontime Toastmasters. His name was Leonard Knight. He worked for the city of Phoenix, and he was an awesome speaker, did a lot of professional speaking jobs. But he would stick his hand in his pocket and jingle those coins and his keys all the time. And it was really distracting. But again, he was a great speaker, so you could kind of forgive him for that. So what other examples do we have of physical turnoffs? Gestures, body language, PowerPoint, and other technology issues. What are some of those turnoffs?
Bobby, just for FYI, the post that you made in the chat are not showing for anybody that came online after you posted them.
Okay, is it there now?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, okay, thank you. And Robin, I see your hand is up, so a physical turnoff.
Yes, when speakers are pacing back and forth across the stage like a lion trapped in a cage, it can be very distracting.
Yes, I totally agree. Cynthia.
When the person wears an inappropriate clothing and they're so worried about their clothing, they're forever tugging at it, a dress too short, a blouse too tight, a button about to pop, and they're just constantly tugging at it and tugging at it. Or even if a gentleman has a sport coat on and he keeps doing the, I want to close it, but I'm not closing it gesture. Those are the three that bug me too.
Yeah, the button and unbutton, I've seen that a lot by men. And also some people touch their face a lot. Or you mentioned earlier about, putting your hair back behind your ears or whatever it might be. What other physical turnoffs can you think of? Gestures, body language. What are some of those PowerPoint problems?
Yeah.
I see Kathy and then we'll take Marilyn. Kathy.
Oh, okay. When you said PowerPoint, that really, I understand the benefit of PowerPoint. I think it's a wonderful tool, but when the speaker just keeps it up and doesn't speak, I can read the PowerPoint. You don't have to put it up there and then read off of it. I see so many speeches where either they rely on it they do rely on it too much, and if it doesn't work, they're lost. So if you're going to have a PowerPoint, I would say use it sparingly and be prepared, because I've seen a lot of instances where it doesn't work and they're lost.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. So Marilyn, how about you? Physical turnoffs.
PowerPoint. Lord help us. PowerPoint. Okay. I have 3 pet peeves about PowerPoint. 1, people who stare at the PowerPoint and have their back to their audience. I just want to get up and go smack them. 2, when I see a PowerPoint slide pop up and all I see is text, I want to leave the room because I know what's coming. 3, people who don't understand that the biggest impact they can make with PowerPoint is images, and then to ignore it. There you go, my PowerPoint peeves.
Thank you. Who else has some physical turnoffs? Or should I expand a little more on PowerPoint? We've talked about too much text on the slides, but how about too many slides where you're constantly zipping through? Or what about, charts and diagrams and whatnot that are really complicated and have a lot of fine print? A graphic really should be used to simplify a presentation, not to make it more complex and harder for the audience. Or what about those colors and fonts and the whizzy animations and all of that? I think you take the focus away from yourself as a speaker when you do, try and use too much of the bells and whistles. So what are some other gestures and whatnot? Connie, I see your hand.
Well, I just have to laugh because I don't know. I'm sharing all my little things, but I'm still fascinated when in Windows, how the document flies into a folder. So when somebody has a PowerPoint that's animated, I'm just like, ooh. That's fading it. And then I'm focusing on the wrong things.
Perhaps so. But it sounds like you kind of like the whizzing and the animation. So maybe it's not a turnoff for you. We don't all have to agree on what turns us off because we're all unique individuals.
Well, I like it because I like to watch it, but then I'm like, wait, I should be paying attention to the speaker. So then I really don't like it because they've distracted me.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. And Lordly, did I see your hand or no? Okay.
No, I was just wiping my face.
Oh, okay. So here's one for you. Have you ever seen a speaker that does, you know, a lot of pointing and whatnot? And for me, when I think of extreme gestures, I think of Adolf Hitler. And he did a lot of pointing and whatnot. But compare that with Bill Clinton. How did Bill Clinton point? He would take his hand and have his fingers bent, and he would make his points almost using a fist instead of a wagging finger. What are some other gestures that are annoying? How do you feel when you see a speaker who's got their arms crossed? It sort of comes across as defensive. And Marilyn, your hand is up.
Gestures. I don't remember what we used to call it, but when somebody does, it's just, and I don't know if you can see that, it's like when they just do this.
Oh,
You know, they're talking and this is how they do it. I mean, even being raised around Cajuns, I know that you have to move your hands, you know, but yeah, that double-fisted bounce. Oh God, no.
you know, and that I think that holds true for really any gesture that's overused and repetitive to the extent that it's practically the only gesture that you see that speaker use. And Warren, I see your hand is up.
Well, going along with what Marilyn said, well, I remember in one speech that I did, actually it was in an evaluation contest, and I was the test speaker. I got called for egg beater hands, which was, so I was reminded of that when Marilyn talked about the gestures where there's just this constant motion with real no direction to it. And I was beating eggs with my hands in that particular speech for a while.
Okay. Robin, I see your hand.
Yes, when somebody never looks at the audience, actually, maybe they're nervous or whatever, so they're looking down or away or just not making that connection.
Yeah, and in fact, on the list, there's a couple of items that talk about looking like over the room rather than making eye contact with individuals. Or have you ever seen a speaker that would favor one side of the room over another?
Yeah, that's another one.
Yeah. So what about Cynthia, your hand?
I saw that with a TV evangelistic. He was so busy presenting the sermon to the people on the stage that his back was to the TV cameras practically the entire time, because he was speaking directly to the special people instead of the general audience. And I've just found it annoying as all get out. So people need to be aware, who is the primary audience, or where is the priority? Thank you.
That's an excellent point, Cynthia. And you just reminded me of something. When we had our hybrid meetings for Showtime, one of the issues that we experienced was that the people who were viewing remotely didn't feel included because we weren't in the habit of looking at the camera. So that's something we should keep in mind as we move forward and have more Toastmasters and other meetings in a hybrid format. To be inclusive, we need to look at the camera so that the remote participants feel like they're included. And let's, talk about virtual environment in general. How about sound issues and background noises and poor lighting and camera position, bleeding into your background? All of these are technology fails that can be really distracting and turn off your audience. Kathy, I see your hand.
Yes, when you were talking about the virtual audience, that is something that I have noticed. Actually, one of the clubs I'm in is a hybrid club. And I might be even guilty of this myself, but I try to remember that when anybody in the club wants to ask a question or make a comment to someone who is online, they always turn around and talk to the screen. They don't talk to the person. They're talking to the picture of the person on the screen. So they got their back to the actual camera. And it must be awful. I mean, I sat in on one hybrid meeting online, and it was hard. You don't feel included. You know, you're not part of the group, and that's very difficult. I think it's almost to the point that I think it's got to be one or the other. It's very difficult with hybrid.
It is challenging. Thank you, Kathy. And Marilyn, I saw your hand, and then we'll take Cynthia.
Bobby's not gonna like me.
Uh-oh, it's the glasses.
It's the glasses.
I don't know what to do about my glasses. I have them as far up my head as I can.
And I totally get it, but that glare is
Yeah.
distracting, and it's not just you, but yeah, it's the glasses. Okay.
And these are the cheap, $2 readers, so they don't have any special, anti-glare or whatever. But anyway, that's another story. Thank you, Marilyn, for that. Yet again, another reminder. Nikki, is that your hand? Yes.
Yeah. When you talked about the person who would favor one side of the room, on the flip side of that, you have someone who wants to make sure they're covering the whole room and they keep going back and forth almost manically.
Yes, you're right.
Like their goal is to cover the territory, not to just naturally be inclusive of everybody.
Yeah. And Nikki, the man I spoke about earlier who jingled the coins and keys in his pocket, he was a master at eye contact of an audience. And his technique was to look at someone, and then he'd move to another part of the audience and look at another person for a couple of seconds before he'd move on. So he actually established eye contact with individuals in the audience, and he was great at that. So recently, I attended another genealogy webinar, and the presenter was not able to share their screen. And I guess they had practiced it before the session began, but it took 15 minutes before the woman could, first of all, conclude that she couldn't share the screen. They decided she should log off, reboot her computer, and then come back on, but it took a whole long process. A lot of people left that session. I chose to stay because I prefer the live experience than the recorded experience, but that's a turnoff. If you can't manage the technology, you need to practice more and figure it out before the session. So Lori, I see your hand, and then we'll take Cynthia.
Yes, this goes back to the visuals. It's when somebody is online and they have visuals and it's nothing but visuals. You never see the speaker. I
Good
like to
point.
see the person who's speaking.
So that's kind of an over reliance on PowerPoint. A lot of people use PowerPoint almost like a script, and that can be distracting. So Cynthia, you had your hand up?
I did. I have two. The first one was back in regards to online meetings and the background noise. It's almost tolerable. We'll take a dog occasionally barking, but kids screaming and crying, people have little to no tolerance for whatsoever. And so that's one of mine. I'm with the, it's okay for pets, but they got to close the door. And then I just lost my thought. Oh, Bobby, you did it again. PowerPoint. Wait a minute, what was the last subject? I hate when I do that.
That's
Oh, keep going. I'll come back.
Okay. All right. Well, once again, you guys have really come up with some great examples of physical turnoffs, and you will indeed find even more on the list that the handout I'll put in the chat at the end of the session. So finally, let's move on to our last category of audience turnoffs, which is speaker behaviors and attitudes. So for example, How many times have you seen a speaker that didn't research their audience and then they either talk down to the audience or they're speaking over your head? You need to think about who your audience is. Or how about a speaker that spends lots of time bragging and telling stories about how they became rich and famous and an expert in their field? In fact, Robin, I think after the last Toastmasters convention, I think you had made a comment about one of the keynote presenters who seemed to be a little self-absorbed in the opening stories. Or how about when you go to a workshop or a conference or something and there's a presenter and they're unapproachable. They don't greet people as they enter the venue. They're not available afterwards, something like that. So what other kinds of, general behaviors or attitudes do you notice that are distracting? And then also we'll consider the subcategories of time management, how you handle activities and Q&A, and content choices. So Marilyn, I saw your hand.
Actually, I think Robin's was first.
Oh, okay. Robin, go ahead.
One of the things that bothers me, and I've heard other people say, is when the speaker is really there just to sell their book or a course or something like that. It's not really to help you learn something. It's to get you to come give them money, and sometimes a lot of it.
Yes, absolutely. Overselling and being too salesy. It's really important to inform first and sell second. So Marilyn, what's up? What's your thought?
Oh gosh, I have so many. But anyway, on this one in particular, people who just think that they are so bloody funny, the ones that can't get over how clever they are with their turn of phrase or the joke that they just told, it's sort of like you just want to go up and take them off the stage, So try and remember, we have to laugh first. So,
That proverbial cane pulling them.
yeah.
And Kathy, I see your hand is up.
Yes, you actually briefly mentioned this a moment ago. I have been at presentations, unfortunately, some of them Toastmasters, but other presentations primarily, where I felt hesitant to ask a question because I saw others ask questions and the presenter was so condescending to the person asking the question, or like, boy, you're really stupid for asking that question. Well, we're here to learn, so cooperate with us, give us some information. That really, I've actually walked out of one meeting that was like that. I thought, well, this person is really rude. I'm just gonna leave. So I left, and I don't leave very often because I'm always the one who trips going out the door or whatever, and everybody turns and looks at you. But I did leave that meeting.
You're absolutely right. And that is definitely on the list about being condescending because, for a questioner or a commenter, or sometimes it's just because the presenter doesn't like the question and they make that known basically through their behavior. So who else? What else can you think of? What about time management? Warren.
Well, I was going to lead right into that one. There was one meeting that it was not a Toastmasters meeting, but a department meeting. They brought in a guest speaker. And according to the agenda, he was allocated 20 minutes. So that was an ample amount of time. He talked for 40. And I had some questions for the department manager that at the end of the session, Q&A, that were actually about some of the direction that some things that were coming up with the company. And the manager had to go to another meeting, and I never got to ask my questions. But so once again, I'll just categorize it. It's not being respectful of the listener's time if you say you've been given 20 minutes, but you go on for 40. It's not being respectful of the audience.
I totally agree. And, sometimes when you're presenting at a conference at times the agenda can get thrown off if a particular speaker goes too long, which means then that the next speaker has to make up for that lost time. And that means they need to cut their material potentially in order to help out the meeting planner to keep everything still on schedule. So quick couple stories here. Years ago in my noontime club, my first Toastmasters club, we had a brand new guy who gave an icebreaker, and he went for 22 minutes is the bottom line. But we didn't have the heart to stop him. And why was that? Because he was telling us about his life and his time that he spent in prison and all the things that were happening to him since then and how he's trying to turn his life around. So we didn't have the heart to stop him. Now, just a couple weeks ago, there was a speech in my bilingual club, and it was a non-Spanish speaker doing a speech in Spanish. So it was completely written out, but every word was an effort to get out. For example, la mujer está muy bonita. And she asked for extra time. So she asked for 8 to 10 minutes. At 16 minutes, the Toastmaster said, can you please wrap it up? And at 20 minutes, the applause came. So Laura Lee, that's a case when we needed to be using that clap down the speaker. But it is disrespectful, and it also can show that you're not prepared. If you can't manage your time, you're not a prepared speaker. What other thoughts do you have on just general behaviors? What about activities? And this is one that I think is sometimes a problem for virtual engagements. And that is when you're giving instructions for a breakout room and you want each breakout room to work on a different question. Well, if you post the question in the chat, when people go into the breakout room, they can't see the question anymore. So you have to figure out some kind of a strategy for how you're going to make sure that the people in that breakout room understand what they're supposed to do. Or how about a presenter at a workshop or a conference or something, and they want you to do maybe a pair share or some kind of activity, but they give lousy instructions and you're like, huh? What are we supposed to be doing? Have you ever had that happen?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what other thoughts do we have? What about content choices? Robin, you mentioned about being salesy, jokes that are maybe inappropriate or fall flat. Marilyn.
Okay, well, one going just back just momentarily, people who don't know how to use their props. Okay, but now on to content. When someone wants to give a speech about something that they so obviously know nothing about, and you just sit there, and even if you know just a little bit, you're in pain.
Okay, so choose your material is what I'm getting from that. And I've actually seen like a Venn diagram where they talk about things you love, things you know about, and things that your audience would be interested in. The intersection of those three circles is where you should choose your topic. So what about thank yous and apologizing? What do you guys think? How many times do we hear people apologize? Oh, I'm so nervous, or sorry for the typos, or sorry, I'm going over time, or whatever it is. In general, it's probably not a good idea to be apologizing during your presentation.
That's right. Yeah.
Kathy.
Well, that is true. As a matter of fact, I have an online, very informal online speakers course I'm taking. And they always say first off, never start your speech with, I just got to get some information together. I'm not quite ready. Could you please just give me another minute? well, that's okay, that's not good. And then always apologizing or making excuses, whatever it might be. Those people in the audience don't know if you said anything wrong. So just go through it, just glide through it, keep it copacetic and move on, because you're going to lose your audience at that. And they're going to say, this guy doesn't know anything. Why did I spend my $10 doing this? So you got to be really careful about that.
You're right. You absolutely lose credibility if you're too apologetic or don't seem confident. So have you ever been at a presentation or heard a speech where they take forever and ever and ever before you get to the heart of whatever it is they want to talk about? Or on the other side, what about speakers who they notice the clock? Oh my God, I've got a green light. I got to hurry up and finish it up so I don't, hit the red. And then you feel a little bit cheated, almost like they were going to give you more information, but you didn't get to receive it. So Robin, I see your hand.
Yes. One of the things that I hear from a lot of Toastmasters is that you shouldn't say thank you at the end of your speech to the audience, because the audience should be grateful to you for you giving them good information, assuming that you did actually give them good information. But it seems to me that you are still should be grateful for their attention, because especially these days with your cell phones and everything else, it's really easy to lose attention from people. So it seems to me that it's worth it, at least in some situations, to indeed say thank you for listening or something like that.
I agree with you, Robin. I think there are appropriate times to say thank you. What I don't think is a good idea is to have thank you be sort of an undramatic ending to your presentation, like blah, 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 thank you. You need to leave people on an up, or, your final message. Marilyn, I see your hand.
Well, I was just going to say that, yes, thank you is fine if you're being specific. Thank you for your time and attention. Nothing wrong with that. But you don't end a speech with thank you, because what are you thanking them for? So I usually end with Madam Toastmaster, Mr. Toastmaster.
That's the easier thing.
Yeah.
That's a good rule of thumb, Marilyn. Thank you for sharing that. And before we run out of time here, I want to talk briefly about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So for example, how many speakers have all of their examples and all of their images are suited to, let's say, white men, or something else that just reflects stereotypes and generalities, or making assumptions? In fact, I think one of the Toastmasters convention presenters, I think it might have been this year or last year, I remember she told a story where she knew she was going to be meeting the dean of a university, I think it was. And so she was approaching a man and a woman, and she thought that the man was the dean. And she caught herself then, because she found out that the dean was actually the woman. So we really have to be careful of our assumptions these days. And putting characteristics before people. So when we are speaking, our language should put people first. So for example, it's better to say person in a wheelchair rather than cripple, or woman on our sales team rather than saleswoman, or person who is blind rather than blind man. So all of those are examples. A couple others that I came across is, it's not a good idea, or it's an audience turnoff when you use derogatory terms relating to mental health. So for example, even joking about yourself, oh, I'm OCD today, whatever it is, that can be offensive to someone who actually has that condition. So what other things can you think of that are sort of diversity and inclusion related? Connie, I see your hand.
ties in two things about pick your humor and know your audience, as well as not intentionally think about you could upset people with your language, your words, because if you know me, and most of you do on this call, I joke that I'm a technotard, and I've said that, and until somebody brought it to my attention that they found that offensive, I never thought in a million years that it would be, because I'm referring it to myself and not in, but then I stopped using it.
So maybe you
this-
can be a techno dinosaur like me. That's probably not an alternate way of saying the same thing. And Kathy, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Well, example that I used to use quite often when I would forget something I wanted to say or something I needed to do, I would say, "Oh, I'm having sometimers moment. I'm having a sometimers moment." Trying, unfortunately, improperly kidding about Alzheimer's, forgetfulness. Well, now that I've gotten older and I know people who have some issues, I find where that probably I don't use it anymore. I find that probably was not the proper way of doing things, but I think it comes with age and being out in public more, that you realize these things. You've got to be very careful, and you don't mean anything by it, but it can happen.
Yeah, exactly. And so here's some other examples that I came across. The word gypped could be derogatory about referring to gypsies or that ethnic group, or the word ghetto, or using words like power hour, blind spots, handicapped, grandfathered. So I saw some suggestions. For example, rather than saying grandfathered, implying an age thing, you could use the word legacy. Or instead of saying powwow, you could talk about having a huddle or a team meeting, something like that. So we have to really, these days, we really do need to be careful about our word choices more than ever before. And that brings me to the subject of personal pronouns, preferred personal pronouns. This is an area where I am personally struggling. It's something I need to work on. And I recently read an article in People magazine where they were talking about some movie star or famous person who went by the they, them personal pronoun. And so the writer of the article wrote the story using that pronoun. And I found it really confusing because they talked about a movie that I don't know, they were making changes or whatever, and I couldn't tell if they meant the individual they were talking about who was having an issue, or if it meant the studio and the actor. It was confusing, but so I am struggling with that, but it's something I'm working on. At least I'm aware, So anything else we want to bring up about diversity, equity, and inclusion? Kathy, again, I see.
Well, just real quickly, that one that example you just gave, I don't understand all of that. Maybe I'm just, I don't understand the they, them, her, she. I don't understand what they're talking about. To me, it's like a woman, a man. Anyways, I'm so old-fashioned that I'm out of sync with the world, I guess, but I don't understand that one at all.
It's a matter of we need to just take the time to become educated. I'm thinking about doing a speech about that topic. Cynthia, I see your hand up.
Well, last year I had a habit of saying young lady, young man on a lot of Zoom call meetings. And then I started noticing people's pronouns are changing and popping up. So I had to say, okay, people, or just young persons, just so they didn't feel like I was picking on them or taking them out of their pronoun. And it's like, well, if the pronoun's not in your signature, get over it. And so therein lies where my impatience is. How dare you get upset? I'm trying to give you a compliment of calling you a young person, And yet you're freaked out because I called you she, he, you know, it's like, okay, get over it.
Yeah.
But to the point that you're raised, and Kathy is still trying to learn it and understand it, it's like, oh, whatever. Put a tag on your forehead and be done.
Okay, Marilyn, we'll have you go last and then we'll wrap up, okay?
Okay, just to kind of address the apparent confusion, it is the responsibility of a person who does not want to be identified by what would be an obvious pronoun. It is their responsibility to let us know how they want to be addressed. Granted, but if they give you a sign that the one you used is not what they prefer, clarify it with them. Just say, I am sorry, I was not made aware, and I will in the future promise you I will respect your decision. And that's all it really takes. They just want to be acknowledged for who and how they see themselves. So
I totally get that. Thank you, Marilyn. And so, yes, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a huge topic these days, especially for professional speakers and our contest speakers. We have an international audience, so these are things we need to think about. So I am impressed with this group. We came up with lots of ways that we can turn off our audience as speakers. But now what? I mean, it was fun to rant, but what are we going to do about it? Because we don't want to be that speaker, right? So I thought long and hard about this, and I came up with a few strategies that I think can help all of us to avoid turning off our audience. And the first thing is you have to care. You have to care enough to demonstrate respect for your audience by putting in the work it takes to improve your voice, to improve your content, to improve your presentation style. And second, I think you just need to be aware. And once you are aware of potential audience turnoffs, then you can rethink your choices and do something to avoid these issues. And the third thing should be obvious to every Toastmaster, and that is to prepare. Know your audience, review your material, have other people review your material. Practice, practice, practice. Show up early. Test the equipment and technologies. Be approachable, be inclusive. All of these things have to do with preparation. And lastly, I think that in the end, none of us is perfect, but when we are our authentic self, nothing beats the natural flair that is part of your own personal style. And when you are yourself and do your best, I think most people will forgive you for any minor faux pas or a misstep in your presentation. Does anyone else have any thoughts about what we can do to avoid turning off our audience? Okay, well then that is the message I want to leave you with tonight. Care about your audience enough to do the work. Be aware of potential turnoffs and fix them. Prepare, prepare, prepare. And finally, be yourself and let your own natural flair connect you with your audience. So Marilyn, I'll let you close out our session tonight. Thank you for being here. I appreciate your time tonight.
all right. We would like to thank everyone who attended tonight for coming in and supporting the work that Showtime Toastmasters has committed to do for our district and for our fellow public speakers around the world. We really thank you for that. Now, we will not be having a power hour in December. Yes, we're taking the holidays off, but we will be back in January. So please remember to find us again. It's the third Monday in January. And as you can see, you can go to showtime.toastmastersclubs.org to register for both our club meetings and our workshops. And we would love to have you come and visit one of our regular meetings. We really appreciate the input that we get from those outside of our club, and we want to thank you all for coming tonight. Have yourself a wonderful rest of the week and be very safe, and we'll see you all again next time.